Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and talk to you about what we've been doing in Scotland. So this is very much a collaborative project with my colleague, Dr. Jenny August, who's at the University of Glasgow and is online with us listening. We both work in maths and stats support services at our universities rather than in a maths department, supporting students from across the university. So kind of leaning into a bit of what you were saying about the students coming from different disciplines who have a mathematical requirement in their course. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the Scottish school system so that it's sort of in context. We do have standardised exams in Scotland. The SQA just changed their name, but it's the Scottish Qualification Authority. And the first sort of school level exams are what we call our Nat 5s, and they are taken when you're around 15 or 16, GCSE equivalent for anybody who's familiar with the English system. And we have two qualifications there, a mathematics qualification and an applications of mathematics, which I'm not talking about today because it's not for people going into STEM subjects, it's for other courses. Subsequent to that, when your fifth year of high school, you're 16, 17 years old, you do the SQA Higher, which is the main qualification required for entry to Scottish universities. You then have the option to go to university. You're often quite young when that happens. So a lot of students will stay on for a sixth year and they do the advanced higher, and that's equivalent to an A level or your an A level really. It's a bit beyond a lot of other qualifications, and it is required for going to the rest of the UK. So if you want to study in England or Wales when you're from Scotland, you must have the advanced hires. We do have the option to then perhaps go into the second year of a Scottish degree, so you miss the first year at that point. But we are focused predominantly on this point. Because the main requirement for all STEM subjects in Scotland is a higher in mathematics. There's a few exceptions, some biological sciences, occasionally the odd chemistry degree. Ours doesn't require it, but they do at Glasgow, for example. So there's a few exceptions, but not many. If you're doing any physics, engineering, you need to have a higher in mathematics. Because of that common starting point for students, we wanted to develop a test that would help those people in the transition. So common issues that we'd both seen with students either not knowing what they don't know, or it's been a while since they've done it, if they've come back to university after a while, requests from staff at the university for us to help assess the level of students. So we got together and we were inspired by a talk by Don and his colleagues in the 2023 Kettle MSOR meeting that showed us about this adaptive algorithm that's in the NUMBAS diagnostic test. So that was the tool that we wanted to use to create something that could be used by other colleagues in Scotland because of that common requirement. We also wanted to answer some questions around transition, like does their grades really reflect their ability when they arrive? And we created a survey to go with the test that I'll talk about in a minute. So we studied the SQA curriculum because we didn't have a tool that had all of the questions built into it, and refined that to include what was needed, what we thought was most pertinent at university, because we don't want to have to replicate the entire school degree, school qualification. They've done that already. We ended up with 10 learning areas that were predominantly pre-calculus, but we did cover a little bit of differentiation integration in their final year at school. So we've got a little bit of that in there. We created the exam in NUMBAS, and it was delivered to a small number of students and some very willing staff who took the test for us in 24-25, which allowed us a small sample to sort of refine the test a little bit for a better deployment this academic year. So everything I'm talking about is very new. We just delivered it before Christmas. I'm going to focus on Heriot-Watt now. So the test that we developed was available to any student at my institution and at University of Glasgow with Jenny. But I had two colleagues who were lecturing sort of mainstream courses that wanted to use the diagnostic test. So I have two main cohorts. I have what's called a Global College Accelerator programs. They are a kind of foundation program where they don't have as high an entry requirement, and they are going into science and engineering. They would be at the lower end of the math scale coming into the university, and then we have the maths and actuarial students here in the other box who are at the upper end, and we had lecturers in both of those programs that wanted to deliver a diagnostic at the very beginning. So just a very brief overview of the entry requirements. The slightly worrying thing for the Science and Engineering Accelerator is they have lower grades because it's a foundation program, but it's science or maths. So some of them don't have any maths at that higher level coming in, which is a concern. They were given the test to take in class within the first sort of 2 weeks of the term starting in September, and that was only deployed in Edinburgh. Because we have campuses, like I said earlier, kind of all over the place. Our maths and actuarial students are very much at the other end. They have to have A's and a B, and that obviously must have an A in mathematics. There are a few students that will get in with what we call contextualized offers, so slightly lower grades if they come from some sort of disadvantaged background that's sort of ranked in the sort of Scottish system. They were allowed to take the test in their own time in the first couple of weeks, but both cohorts had to do the test. They didn't need the score, they just had to do the test as a very tiny percentage of their final. It was a sort of 5% if you take the test or you don't. And that was delivered in Edinburgh and Dubai because our programme for actuarial science runs in both of our campuses. To hopefully alleviate some of the students' worries at the beginning, I spent a lot of time talking to them, going out to their classes, to tell them some very practical information, how it worked, the syntax for NUMBAS, because they might not be familiar with that. Some were not. I gave them information about this optional survey that I was running to gather some demographic data, pre-university grades, and their confidence levels and the sort of learning outcomes that we had. And we gave them a lot of reassurance that the test was there to support their learning. It wasn't punitive in any way whatsoever, and how to follow up on the personalized results that they got. I've got a very small screenshot at the bottom of, I did this test for 4 seconds, so I have to revise all of these different topics, and it's got the link to my math support service at Heriot-Watt. The results were administered by myself, which gave a degree of impartiality because we never assess the students. We work with the staff, but we never deliver exams. Only the aggregated data was passed back to the lecturers to try and let them know that, you know, we're not singling individuals out. We were giving them a cohort overview of these topics are maybe weaker than others. We'll find out whether that helped to alleviate their symptoms or not later on. So just a few of the early results that we got. So we had 335 test records from that year, which I was really pleased with. Only 170 of them were complete attempts. I'm going to come back to that at the end about future kind of things that we want to work on. 73 of those were from MAX, which is the Maths, Actuarial and Computer Science students, and 76 were from the Global College. And then we had 21 other people from different places that just took it of their own volition. Just for reference, the sort of average grade boundaries percentage-wise from the higher exams, I took the last 10 years that are published publicly, and for an A you need over 71%, B between 59 and 71, and so on. And I've got a histogram with different sized bins aligned to those boundaries. So the math students are here on the left, and their average score is the red line. It was 64%, which I thought, you know, as a superficial look at their grades was fine. It's not at an A, but we do have a bit of a mix of students. Some of them maybe haven't done the test in the last year and so on. Slightly worrying. There were some that were right down at the fail area after a complete test. And I'm not too sure why that was. And we had a large chunk that were up above. Contrasting that to the Global College students, as we might expect, since some of them don't have any maths at that level, we're right down the other end. So their average grade was 35%, so that's a fail at the higher, if we're comparing it to the higher exam, and most of them were bunched down that end of the table. So, and it was a statistically significant difference, as you might imagine, with such a big gap there. So superficially, maybe slightly worrying that some of the math students were right down the bottom end, but the average was about what we'd expect. After taking all the completed tests, I matched that to the students who had done the survey, because we don't have any demographic data sort of saved in the student system about their pre-university journey. So we'd asked them to take this survey. And after that, there was a total of 22 from maths and 46 from the Global College who'd done both, so that I could make some sort of comparison. We asked them when they took their last exam. Most of them had done that the summer before they arrived at university. The next biggest chunk were the year before that. And then there was a few that had gone back to 2020. So it'd been a good while since they'd taken a maths test. We also asked them what their last qualification was. So there's, the numbers don't add up because some of the students took higher and advanced higher because they spent the last 2 years at school. But most of them in the max cohort were from the Scottish system, actually from the Global College too. most of the maths students had also done an advanced higher because they're sort of self-selecting. They like maths, they want to continue that. Few from A levels, and then we had some other qualifications also from other places. We had a couple from the States, some from Mexico, a whole different variety. Due to that, it was difficult to compare, like an A at higher and an A level are very different. So our university, UCAS, what does that stand for? University Centralized Access Application System. Remember what that is? Students all apply to university through the same system, and the grades get converted to points. And we thought that would be the best way to make a comparison between these variety of qualifications that we had. So we converted all the ABs from the different things into these UCAS points to allow a little bit of comparison. So the top graph is along the bottom are the UCAS points, so they're pre-university score. Some of them have 0. That's because those students from the Global College didn't have the higher level qualification, and grades in the UCAS system below that don't qualify for university entry, so they have a 0 point associated with them. I had to scale sort of transform the total score because some of the assumptions for the linear model didn't fit initially, but we scaled it to the square root of the total score, and it hit all the criteria, and we got an upward slope. So there was, the higher their UCAS points, the higher we expected their score in the test to be, with an R value of 0.385, if I remember correctly. Which initially I wasn't too sure about, and doing a little bit of reading, apparently in the social sciences that's quite good. So there's still some variation that's not explained, and I have a list of things I think that's possibly the reason for that. The students maybe having a break since their last test, maybe not putting that much effort into the test in certain instances, and so on. Interestingly, there wasn't a big variation in the confidence. So this bottom line, I haven't gone into the individual learning outcomes yet because this is still relatively recent, doing okay for time. But I aggregated that into an overall confidence for their maths. And the higher their UCAS points, the higher their confidence. But we had a funny dip in the maths students. There's not a huge sample, so whether it's important or not, we don't yet know. But that mark there around 33 is the A in the Scottish Higher. And those students were less confident than those that had a lower grade, and obviously those that had a higher grade. So again, was it just the small sample we had? I don't know yet, but I found that interesting. And what was also interesting was that even the students with a 0 in their UCAS who had no prerequisite mathematics were really quite confident about their abilities. So that's something to be aware of for sure going forward. And there's definitely a lot more we can look at. A few other things I looked at briefly. There was no statistical difference in the confidence between the different cohorts, between men and women, and between different qualifications pre-university. We had some positive correlations between the test score and the UCAS points, but very weak between the confidence and the test score there. So just a few things I've been trying in preparation for looking into this in more detail. And I guess it's very small in here. So the overall confidence level and the test score, I'm not sure if that's very scattered, possibly slightly upwards. I'm not too sure. I haven't had a chance to look at that too much. But there were some interesting things, and definitely some things that we have to work on. So our next steps between Jenny and myself are looking at more analysis on the existing data. So we have a lot of data. We have the time it took them to do all the questions, as well as all the overall test. We have their confidence levels for each of the outcomes. So we can dive into this a lot more. There's a lot of data that gets spat out from the NUMBAS or JSON dump that I have to troll through. We need to look at the test itself and analyze whether they're doing the questions are doing what we want them to do. And we're going to look at some item analysis, which a colleague of mine at Edinburgh University, George Kinnear, has worked on in the past. And we're going to look at those non-completed tests. So some of those tests were very close to being completed, so I don't know why they didn't kind of finish off the test. So we're going to try and look into that a little bit and see if there's any interesting data there. There's also some students who, because they were asked just to do the test, went in, answered a question and left the exam, and they kind of ticked the box. They weren't getting any useful feedback or extra support, but they they did what they were asked to do, right? We want to deploy the test to more cohorts. Like I said, we kind of deployed it to the two extremes of the sort of university mass scale. Because I had interested colleagues who were wanting that information, I'd like to sort of look at some other cohorts, more mixed backgrounds, perhaps, like the engineering students. We do have a follow-up survey on how they felt about taking the test. Sort of their, oh, sorry, that's my timer telling me to stop. I'm just waiting for the ethics approval in the system at the university to just follow back up with that and look at their not only their anxiety, but what happened in their first year grades. So that obviously won't happen till May, June time when they finalise their exams for this year. Disseminate this to other institutions. It's already been used at Aberdeen University with our colleague there. And I want to do this over several years to look at, see what's happening, if there's any patterns that we can develop, and obviously gather more data from the test and from their sort of feelings about the test. Yes, so that's me. Thank you for listening. There's just a couple references there about following up diagnostic testing with support and so on, and the item analysis that we plan on doing over the summer when the test is complete. Thank you very much.